Hello students, welcome again. Students, in our previous video lecture, we discussed metaphysical poetry, its features and the time period. Today, we want to focus the attention of today's lecture on pre-Raphaelite poetry, which we find in English literature during the 19th century, that means during the Victorian age. We will discuss the important features of this new type of poetry, pre-Raphaelite poetry of English literature. As I told you, it was the time period of moralism, of socialism. When we study the 19th century English literature, when we study the novels of Charles Dickens, when we study John Ruskin, when we study Carlyle, we find that there was much emphasis on moral values. There was much emphasis on social reform. I mean, literature was used as a tool to reform the society by these particular writers during the 19th century. But there were a group of poets who were not satisfied with this trend of these authors, and they reacted against these authors, and that's why these people who reacted against this moralism or this too much socialism in literature, that group of poets are known, that group is known as pre-Raphaelite poets, and they started writing poetry which was reacting against the contemporary trend, and their poetry was known as pre-Raphaelite poetry. Okay, so in short, it was a group of some dissatisfied poets, okay, in 1848, which made this group is known as pre-Raphaelite group of poets. D.G. Rossetti was the pioneer, was the founding leader of this new type of poetry. Along with Rossetti, we have Holman Hunt, William Morris, A.C. Swinburne, and so many others. Okay, they focused on the past, on the expression of the past or middle ages, and they searched for beauty. Now the question is, why this group is known as pre-Raphaelite poets, or why their poetry is known as pre-Raphaelite poetry? Then let me tell you, originally this movement actually belonged to Italy, and it had nothing to do with literature, it had nothing to do with poetry. But in those times, during the 19th century, there was a movement of painting in the field of painting in Italy. Okay, in Italy there were some poets who were not satisfied with the artificial technique of painting. Okay, the lofty technique of painting done by, which was popularized by Raphael. Remember this name, Raphael. Okay, so a group of painters who were not satisfied with a great painter Raphael, his techniques. Okay, so what did they do? They reacted against him. They tried to find out the real beauty. They wanted to express the real beauty of nature in their painting, and they did not follow Raphael. They followed the predecessors of Raphael, means they followed the painters who were existing before Raphael. So these poets these painters who reacted against Raphael, they were known as pre-Raphaelite painters. Okay, so the similar kind of reaction you find in literature also. Okay, in literature also there was a group of writers, poets who are using poetry as a tool to reform the society, right, to express the moral values among the people. So there were a group of poets who were not satisfied with this, so they went before them. Okay, so this is the same situation takes place in poetry also during the 19th century, like the poets like Rossetti, Swinburne, Morris and all others. Okay, So they reacted just in the manner in which the painters in Italy reacted against Raphael. So the painters were called the Pre-Raphaelite painters. In the same manner, these poets like Swinburne, Morris and Rossetti, they were now called the Pre-Raphaelite poets. Okay, I hope now you understand why it is called pre-Raphaelite poetry. So the movement, this movement in poetry takes its name from the field of painting, from the movement of painting which took place in Italy. Now, what are the important features of this pre-Raphaelite poetry? There are 7 features which I am going to discuss in today's video lecture. Number 1 is, I told you, reaction against too much socialism and too much moralism. Okay, these poets like, there were poets like Tennyson, Lord Alfred Tennyson, there were poets like Lord Byron, okay, Browning and all such people. There were novelists like Carlyle, novelists like Ruskin, Charles Dickens. Okay, they used literature as a tool to reform the society, but these pre-Raphaelite poets, they freed literature and poetry from all these bondages. They believed that being an author, being a poet, it is not my responsibility to teach the moral values to my citizens. Okay, this is actually the task of the philosophers, not that of a poet. So that was the main feature of the pre-Raphaelite poetry. Second, which is much related to the first one, is that this group of poets, they believed in this theory of art for art's sake. I have prepared a separate video, already uploaded this video on art for art's sake, so you can just watch it later on to get some detailed idea about this theory which existed in the English literature during the 19th century. But these pre-Raphaelite poets, they were pure artists. They believed that art has no function to play, art has no role to play, art is for nobody's sake, art is for art's sake. They believed in this theory. Okay, they worshipped art, they worshipped beauty, they believed in the expression of beauty as it is. Okay, they believed that art has no function and it does not teach any morals. To teach and to please and all these functions, the poet is not concerned with at all. If poetry preaches something, it is not poetry at all. Okay, love and beauty are the expression of these things of beauty that we see with our eyes must be presented as a pure art. Okay, so they believed in this perfection of art. Okay, they believed in this theory of art for art's sake. Another important feature is escape to Middle Ages. These poets, they were not satisfied with the current situation, and that's why they mainly went to the past Middle times. Okay, you remember John Keats? In John Keats' poetry also you find the presentation of the Middle Ages. Hellenism, I think that also I have discussed in one of my videos on John Keats. Okay, so these, just like John Keats, just like some of the romantic poets, these poets of the pre-Raphaelite poetry, they also escaped to the past or Middle Ages. They wanted to present the beauty of the past. Okay, so medievalism, like the qualities of chivalry, knighthood, adventure, heroism, the past ancient beauty, all these things, these things delighted the pre-Raphaelite poetry. Rossetti was a master of this presentation of medieval atmosphere in his poetry. Like if you read his poems, The Blessed Damsel and the sister Helen. These two poems are so beautiful examples, if you want to find out the medieval atmosphere, the expression, the presentation of medieval expression in his poetry. His poetry, these two poetry, Sister Helen and Blessed Damsel, they are highly full of symbolism and mysticism because of this medievalism. So that is this thing. And the fourth important feature of pre-Raphaelite poetry is pictorial quality. Pictorial quality means they wanted to draw the whole picture with the help of words, because I told you this movement is actually inspired by a movement of painting which took place in Italy. Okay, so they took inspiration from that movement of painting, and that's why the elements of painting also entered into their poetry, into the poetry of these pre-Raphaelite poets. Okay, the pre-Raphaelite poetry was focusing on more on the presentation of colors, okay, colorful pictures with the help of words. Rossetti was a great master of this pictorial presentation of nature. Like Ruskin has rightly remarked that every pre-Raphaelite figure means a poet, is a true portrait of some living person. Every minute accessory is painted in the same manner. Okay, so Ruskin also accepted this ideology of the pre-Raphaelite poets. He believed that these pre-Raphaelite poets, they they presented everything in a minute and detailed manner. They painted the pictures with the help of words. Okay, so pre-Raphaelite poets took very much care in the presentation and expression of the precise details. I have taken one example from Rossetti's poem The Blessed Damsel. You read these two lines: she cast her hands, her arms along the golden berries. Okay, there is a plant of berries. Okay, and she cast her arm along the golden berries and laid her face between her hands. Okay, so this is how the poet creates the picture of a lady who is embracing the plant of berries and puts her arms between her two hands. Okay, so this is how they used to create the pictures with the help of words. Now another important feature of pre-Raphaelite poetry is melodious quality, music. Okay, the element of music, you find it is this pre-Raphaelite poetry is rich in music and melody. Okay, you find free flowing musical lines. Swinburne, again, as far as melody is concerned, melody in poetry is concerned, Swinburne is the supreme medalist of the pre-Raphaelite poets. Okay, you find proper rhythm, proper rhyming and use of beautiful meters. Okay, in pre-Raphaelite poetry, vowels after vowels and consonants after consonants, the rhythm is created. If you read these poems, Atlanta in Caledon and the Pound of Spring, you will find these examples. I have taken one example from this poem, The Pound of Spring. You read these lines, so musical, so melodious lines. The wild wing sleeps with the weight of its lips. The wild wing sleeps with the weight of its leaves, to the limbs that glitter, the feet that scare, the wolf that follows, the fawn that flies. Okay, so kind of rhythm is presented, melody is created with the help of beautiful use of words. Okay, sixth important feature of pre-Raphaelite poetry is high sensuousness. Again, high sensuousness you find in whom? In John Keats. Okay, John Keats was a predecessor of this pre-Raphaelite poet, so perhaps they might have taken inspiration from John Keats. Okay, as far as sensuousness is concerned, what is sensuousness? Five senses: our sense of vision, sense of hearing, sense of touch, sense of smell, and sense of taste. These senses, the objects are presented in poetry which appeals our five senses. Okay, that's called sensuousness in poetry. Shelley, we know Shelley and Browning gave sensuousness to feeling, but Rossetti and Morris gave sensuousness to thought. Okay, so that is the difference between the romantic poets and the pre-Raphaelite poets. These pre-Raphaelite poets focused on the physical beauty and outward external loveliness of nature and human body. So their poetry is little sometimes immoral also. Why? Because they are more concerned with the external beauty of the lady or the external beauty of a gentleman. Okay, sometimes external beauty of nature, but the way they present it in a sensuous manner, sometimes it goes into the line of immoral poetry. So it is a bit open hearted poetry or bit immoral poetry also. And that's the reason why some of the critics were not happy with the pre-Raphaelite poetry, those critics who believed in the moral values. Okay, but the seventh feature of pre-Raphaelite poetry is lack of sense. Now this is one of the limitations of pre-Raphaelite poetry. Why? Because these poets sacrificed the sense for the sake of sound, melody, color, and a picture. They wanted to create beautiful picture. They wanted to write melodious poetry. Okay, so they focused more on sound. They focused more on music. They focused more on creating pictures with the help of words. But while doing this, they forgot the sense. Sense means thought. The idea was missing at all. So no serious ideas, no philosophical ideas were projected in their poetry. So that was one of the limitations of this pre-Raphaelite poets. Okay, Swinburne is also criticized for his lack of sense of meaning in his poetry. Okay, why? Because he uses some phrases or words just to create musical effect without any sense, without any meaning. So sometimes meaningless words are presented in order to bring melody in the poetry, but that is one of the drawbacks of pre-Raphaelite poetry. All in all, let me conclude this discussion by saying that no doubt two limitations we find in pre-Raphaelite poetry. What two limitations? Number one, sometimes this poetry goes in the line of immorality. Okay, sometimes they are immoral, they are not presenting something in a moral manner. Okay, so this is one limitation. And another limitation of this pre-Raphaelite poetry is that no serious thoughts are presented. Thought is missing, sense is missing. But in matters of pictorial quality, in matters of musical quality, melody, in matters of the expression of the beauties of the Middle Ages, you cannot compare this poetry with any other type of poetry in the whole history of English literature. So that's why this poetry is very important. D.G. Rossetti, William Morris, A.C. Swinburne and others, they brought about a new trend in English poetry during this Victorian era, and they advocated for the type of poetry which was free from moralistic or reformative approach of the Victorian writers like Charles Dickens, Ruskin and others. So all in all, it was indeed a very important movement of poetry we see during the 19th century. I hope now the idea is clear to you, but if you still have any doubts or if you want some more information about this poetry in English literature, do write to me in the comment section of this channel. Thank you for watching. Thank you.